So the topic today are Fiberhoods, and what we're looking at, well, explain why we're looking at it. So BEAD and the other expansion programs, there is progress. It's pretty slow. We are concerned about eligibility, that some areas that are underserved and unserved are not going to currently be identified that way because of the reporting process. So we're trying to figure out, well, how do we get to some of these areas? Investments to fiber to the home continues to be very robust, that there's very strong appetite among investors still for fiber to the home opportunities. That those decisions to invest are largely dependent on the number of households per fiber mile. And that ISPs, a lot of the big opportunities have been snatched up, so ISPs are focusing on smaller and smaller markets for their investments. So this concept of Fiberhoods, what we're trying to do is, or what we're doing is identifying investment grade opportunities. So some of these are standalone service areas, some of them are complementary to grant funded and grant eligible areas. So it might be something that if you've already got a grant, you want to absorb this other area next to it. If you're applying for BEAD, you might want to look at how these Fiberhoods fit into your BEAD plan. But a number of the others are just investment grade opportunities once you've kind of tied together enough various small clusters of households. So our thresholds in finding these is we're looking for areas where no ISP is claiming fiber services in their FCC reporting. Now, one of the gotchas here is people don't generally announce that they're going to provide fiber in an area until they're well along in the process, because there's a lot of competition to reach these places. So we may identify, for instance, we did this in Pennsylvania, State College. Wow, it's a great Fiberhood in Pennsylvania. Well, there is a fiber provider that is building in that area. It's not reflected in the FCC maps because it's not active yet. So you may see Fiberhoods in your region. You have to use local intelligence to find out whether there is already a fiber builder building in that area. So the other thing is threshold is the density of broadband serviceable locations. And the broadband serviceable locations is the term that FCC and CostQuest created related to the fabric. So you need sufficient density of broadband serviceable locations because of that location per mile importance. And then we took that information to refine actual service areas. And then once you've kind of identified some of these, kind of pitching them to ISPs makes a lot of sense from a community perspective. That there's the Fiberhood opportunity. Then in addition, you've got the Dun & Bradstreet data that we've provided, so you can show the businesses and community anchor institutions that are in this footprint. And then mobile towers, that's also in your maps. The mobile towers are important potential service points for ISPs as well. So this analysis is all based on what's called H3 spatial layout. So a lot of us are used to census block groups, and so forth. But the FCC has largely switched to H3 from census blocks. And it's just a different way of representing the geography. They're not really nested. If you're used to census block groups, census tracts, they're all nested. But H3 is not that well nested. So we generally focus on what's called Resolution 8, R8. That's 182 acres. We find that that's the most useful resolution for broadband planning. So looking at an example in an area of Pennsylvania, here's an analysis just kind of raw population density. So the deeper the color of blue, the more broadband serviceable locations there are in that H3R8. And As I mentioned before, that's 182 acres. So you'll see at the top, the darkest blue, that's over 150 locations in that 182 acres. So it's a reasonably dense population density. And we drop down to the next shade of blue, where greater than 80 but less than 150. Then you get into this other shade of blue, greater than 40, less than 80. And then these lightest shades of blue are kind of on the borderline of whether they have sufficient density or not. There's only 25 to 40, but we wanted to include them in the analysis because they may make sense as parts of actual service areas. So that's the view of kind of population density at this H3R8 level. Now you add in the fabric, and so the fabric dots, so those are broadband serviceable locations, each of those little blue dots. You'll see that there's a lot of areas where there's pretty decent population density, like in this area here, but it doesn't reach these thresholds that you see on the left. So if it doesn't reach those thresholds, we haven't colored those hexes in. These people need broadband too. There's no doubt about that, but what we're trying to focus on right now are commercially viable spaces that would not need grant funding. You drop below a certain number of households per fiber mile, and it's just not commercially viable. You would need grant funding. So that's really the focus here, is we're just trying to identify places that you can build now if you can get an ISP to invest in them, to try to accelerate the process a little bit of getting broadband in these areas. So you probably got a cable operator here, no fiber operator. Generally, a lot of those areas should be considered underserved because they don't have enough upload capacity. So great opportunity for a fiber builder to come in and build some of these areas. So when you look at this, you'll see that even some of these, like this nice deep blue area here, there's parts of this hex that don't have any people in it. So you'd more focus on here, and you'll see that we've got kind of these isolated. Here's a pretty good pocket. Here's a pretty good pocket. But when we look at pulling those together, what Sean did was say, well, can we chain these together to create a larger fiberhood? Something that is financially feasible, but also has a pretty decent count of households, because ISPs don't want to come in and build 100 homes. They're looking for 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 homes. So the bigger we can make these fiberhoods by piecing together these population density areas, the better. So you'll see that's what's happened here. Sean has kind of taken these and combined them all into one larger fiberhood that in its entirety is commercially viable for an ISP to build without any kind of subsidy. So that's what we're discussing. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. He's going to walk us through the live map and some of his reasoning and how he created these fiberhoods. And then Andrea is going to review the deliverables that kind of report out on the details of those fiberhoods. So I'll go ahead and stop my share. Turn it over to Sean.
All right, thanks, Tom. Get my share started here. And please speak up in the chat if these maps. I tried to size my browser windows so that it'll look decent in a stream rather than like using my entire screen real estate. So if this ends up looking too small, let me know. I can resize things so that it comes in a little better. So I'm going to start going from big, and then I'm going to look at something on the other end of really small, and then couple of, maybe depending on our time, a couple of in-between options. So Ohio's got some of the highest population density in the Appalachian region, so I figure I would start there. So at the moment, we're just looking at up in the northeast part of the state, Ashtabula, Trumbull, and Mahoning counties, and it's just a street map is all you're looking at the moment. So here's what the providers are claiming. So lots of fiber up here in the northern Ashtabula, chunk of fiber here around Niles and west of Youngstown, tons of cable modem, and then some fixed wireless and DSL in the areas. These are the most rugged rural parts of this region where those are unserved and underserved. But somebody who's looking to compete with a cable provider, they love to see something like this. When you got a big swath of just cable, that's usually a pretty good sign if
And
you're
Sean,
looking to.
you can tell that because on your map the yellow represents cable.
Yes, yes. Yellow is cable modem, green is fiber, orange is DSL, and red is fixed wireless. And gray is that nobody's claiming anything there. Usually that's no population. Like right here, that gray swath is a lake. So there's definitely nobody living there. There might be some Chicago voters living there, but yeah, that's the color coding on here. So then we do the population analysis that Tom said. We just start highlighting the fiber, the hexes that are good fiberhood opportunities. So you can see that, again, I like this if I've got the hat on of somebody looking to expand their fiber market and they're willing to take on a cable company. I really like seeing this pattern. Lots of population density and much of it is contiguous. So I can build, it makes economies of scale work well in this case. I'm building infrastructure that's going to pick up a lot of households. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull in closer on this section, and I will turn off the FCC data so it's not so messy. So you can see that Warren's got a big chunk, and a big chunk of the Youngstown metro area also has just cable provider and lots of population density. So when you turn on the locations, and I'm guessing, yeah, the locations are so dense that like the outlines on the dots actually make some of these areas turn black. So again, really good sign for the economics of this. So then when I drew these, I didn't have to get too crazy. Some areas you'll see in some of the other ones I pull up if we have time. These areas, they end up looking a lot more like a gerrymandered political district where, they're really skinny and they snake around because they're trying to follow just the roads where the population density is. In an urban area like this, that's less of an issue, so I'm able to pretty much cover much of the footprint. The primary providers here, I'll turn FCC back on for a second so you can see. So the green here, this is AT&T is who's claiming the fiber. And pretty much all of the yellow cable modem in this whole region is Charter. So this is kind of a clash of the Titans situation where maybe AT&T is going to try to expand into the rest of Youngstown. Maybe they're already doing it. We don't have insight into that because again, the providers like to play their cards close to their chest when they're expanding. There are also smaller operations operating in this region. There's a company called Ohio Gig. They're not on, they don't have the resources of an AT&T, but they do have some capital backing them. So they would look at this area and they might try to carve out chunks of these neighborhoods with the highest density. Again, no idea whether they're actually doing that, but this is a really good opportunity from a large standpoint. Now to go to the other end, other side of the spectrum. Oops, that's Kentucky. We want West Virginia. There we go. So this is zoomed out on all of the Connect Humanity counties in West Virginia, and you're going to see the fiberhoods are all very small. If we put the FCC data up, you've got big chunks where nobody's claiming anything, and then a lot of just underserved territory where it's DSL or fixed wireless, and that typically means that there isn't much population there either. Just a few handfuls of fiber, and again, some yellow cable modem claims. And if we look at, I'll
Hey,
go ahead and turn the
Sean,
outline. Yeah.
the little arrow on the FCC data, if we click that, could we see the providers' names? Like, how did you know it was AT&T in that area?
I did some prep in advance. I actually, yeah,
Okay.
there are two ways you can do it. You could switch from claim technology to claim provider. We'll see if this loads quickly. Might take it a second because there's a
Yeah,
lot of data in there.
It's hard to see the Fiberhoods too, zoomed out this far.
Yeah. Yeah, so now this color coding, the red is no longer bad. Red is just happens to be the one that's coincidental with that company. But what I would do is you can click on a spot on the map and then it'll give you a choice of the features that are there. So COP claims. So red looks like on this map, red is Frontier. So all of these red hexes are Frontier. And I will pull in closer on this in a second. Armstrong Telephone is up there. That's probably DSL, but who knows? It also could be something else.
Thanks. I just wanted to remind folks that we have the lists and we also have the maps
Yes.
as ways to see who the providers are in your area.
Yeah, so I just switched back to Top Tech. Yeah, so Armstrong is claiming fiber up there. But yeah, what I did in advance, one of the areas I was going to look at is I clicked into the hexes quickly to figure out who's operating there. Okay, I'm going to zoom in closer, turn the FCC data off a second, so I can work county up here. Well, you'll see, while I'm still out here at a fairly wide level, you'll see there just aren't that many Fiberhoods in West Virginia. And that really is a function of population density. West Virginia is one of the lowest density states in the country. So it makes sense that there won't be that many investment grade opportunities that haven't already been built. So pull in on up here on the north. Got a couple of Fiberhood areas here. So when I turn on the hexes, you'll see that like Elizabeth here, it's small. It's just three little hexes, and you see my outline actually goes outside of it a little bit. And I'll pull in really close so you can see the reason why I did that is I turn on the fabric. You'll see that there's, go ahead and turn the outline off a second. You can see that you've got good density in here. A little bit of it sneaks up into this hex that overall that hex doesn't have enough, but there's no reason not to include them. Same here. There's enough houses there and short enough road lines that it makes sense to include that. So that's why I ended up drawing it around here, but I excluded these roads out here because there's just a handful of locations on them. That would, in an area this small, that would really kill the density. Same thing here. To get to this road with this like 8 or 10 locations, you got to go all the way around here to get there. Across the river,
Yeah.
that gets ugly from a financial perspective quickly. This one is small enough that I don't think someone would probably want to build it independently. It has decent population density. It's around 40, which tends to be that's the basement for most providers. Some of them like to see more like 60, but many will go down to 40. 500 locations.
40 locations per mile.
Yes, 40 locations per mile. So, and then there's 500 total in this area. A big company, a lot of the bigger companies often they won't look at anything that's less than 5,000 or sometimes even 10,000 locations, but smaller operations like a local provider or regional provider, this would be enough for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the awards,
or a community build potentially,
or even a community build, yeah, you've got enough density there that it's doable. And then you'll notice all of this dark stuff is an existing award. So I'm going to click on the individual polygons to see who they are. So Citizens Telephone got a federal Rural Digital Opportunity Fund award there. And I'm guessing that's probably what all of these are going to be. RDOF had this strange scattershot approach of census blocks. Yep, more RDOF for Citizens. Let's see, across the river, it's the same thing. Yep. So Citizens Telephone has a big RDOF award in this area, and it actually kind of surrounds this. This is a great opportunity for them. They're obligated to build to these handful of locations here. These are on the other side of the river. That's not going to help much, but like these are on the same side of the river and not far from where they're probably crossing the river here to get to their other section if they're going to make a single network out of this. So their infrastructure is going to have to pass through here anyway. It's in their financial interest to build this section because they're going to pick up a lot more locations with not much fiber. If they're not thinking this is where like the folks from this part of West Virginia reach out to Citizens and say, have you thought about building Elizabeth? Because you're already surrounding it with grant awards. And you'll see when we turn on the BEAD locations, there are actually BEAD locations scattered in this area as well. Again, this makes this a really good potential to get these other, like you won't be able to get grant funding for all of these densely populated ones. But if Citizens applied for BEAD to serve this area around here, this density here really sweetens the package and makes it much more sustainable for them to build the unserved areas that are surrounding it. Similar effect up here. You look at Newark, Greencastle area, and this one is an example where like I kind of stretched it here. If we look at the density on this, I think it's still decent. Yeah, it's almost 40, it's 38. If I chopped out this segment of road here that has sort of a handful of locations on it, that would go up, but then you've got, it's broken up. Nobody's going to build something that's broken up, but it's still functional. And again, you've got some awards nearby, but in this case, like here's the only river crossing here. If there's conduit on that bridge, then it's doable. But like this big area down here, that's probably citizens again. Yeah, that's citizens. Don't have any river crossings very close. So even though this crow flies is probably what's that? Probably 200 yards across the river there. Maybe less than that. It's going to be hard to get there unless there's like a pole crossing or something there that they've got a right to. But they do have a crossing here, so maybe it's doable. This one, so not quite as good an opportunity, but again, it does have bead locations around it, which we would think a provider applying for that, they can sweeten their own internal economics by thinking, yeah, if we overbuild in Newark and Greencastle, that'll help.
And that's an example of kind of that gerrymandering that he's talking about,
Yes.
that connecting two fiberhoods together to create a larger population base to attract ISPs.
Yep. And I'm trying always when I do that, I try to take as few roads as I can in the connection. And again, it's like I have to change my approach because usually the hat I'm wearing is the advocate for the unserved, whereas like get as many people as you can. But when I'm thinking about from the standpoint of somebody planning as an ISP, you want to get as many people in as small of an area as you can. So sometimes you just say, I feel kind of bad when I'm drawing some of these. I'm like, oh, I'm leaving you folks out. I'm sorry.
I think Sean and Tom both bring up a good point that it's very important to keep in mind, is that everything comes back to the appetite of the ISP that you're working with, and that a larger ISP, somebody like a Spectrum, somebody like a Frontier, somebody like an AT&T possibly, is going to have a much larger appetite for risk than the smaller ISPs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the same lines, some of the smaller ISPs might be willing to take a smaller number of locations and a lower location per mile. Also, if you're dealing with a rural electric cooperative, they will generally be willing to take a lower number of locations per fiber mile.
Yeah, good points. And with the small locations, you don't see it in West Virginia because they tend to be only a handful in each county. But in some other states, there will be a lot of small locations separated by low density roads. And if there's middle mile available there, or if the provider's willing to string those together, they can oftentimes, like if it's a cable company that already has, that's actually forward thinking, and that they're not just kind of sitting on their cable plant waiting for it to just fall apart, but they're willing to upgrade and overbuild themselves. They've already got the pole attachment rights and everything. They can string together 5 or 6 of these little fiber hoods, and that makes economic sense to them because it's not a huge pain for them to go from one area to the next. So yeah, you kind of have to look at the context of the areas. I'm going to switch over to Georgia here for a second. I'm going to look at this fiber hood up here, Wallsville Northeast, and I'll zoom in a bit so it's easier to see. I find this one interesting because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's surrounded by a whole lot of fiber. There's a lot of fiber going on in this part of Georgia, at least claimed. And in this case, this is not a monolithic thing. This northern stuff should show up as AT&T. Yep. And when you get down in this southern part that's bounding the southern part of it, this should be Chickamauga Telephone. Yeah. So this is a kind of a little more rare situation. Usually it's one provider. Like you've got like, and actually this is another Clash of the Titans thing. Like AT&T has all this fiber. This blob of cable modem here is Comcast, Xfinity. But in this case, this particular chunk of fiberhood area is bordered by 2 different providers. AT&T's definitely got a lot of resources. Chickamauga probably is doing okay because they do have an EA-CAM award here. So all this big black blob here is a commitment that Chickamauga made to go do at least 120. And looking at it, I think they probably are doing it because when you turn on the speed test ratings, lots of green in that EA-CAM area. So this has good potential. This fiberhood area has good potential, even though it's a little low on density. It's only 34 locations per mile. 750 locations, so it's not huge, but it's also not tiny. But because it's partially overlapped with Chickamauga's award, either if they are willing to go beyond their territory, because sometimes the telephone companies, this footprint is probably their original FCC service territory. So if they have the ability to expand, they can. But in this case, it also AT&T might go in there because they've got two different ones overlapping. Just to show you the locations, that's what the location patterns look like. So you can see maybe why AT&T didn't go in there and compete with Comcast already, because it is lower density than the areas right next to it. So we might be getting a reverse engineering look into AT&T's mindset of what density level they're willing to tolerate. If we're doing okay on time, I will look at a couple more. We'll switch over to North Carolina here. McDowell County is a good one to look at because it's got a little of both. And in general, in North Carolina, I find that the population densities, again, are a little bit low. I'll go ahead and toss on the FCC data real quick so you can see McDowell County's got mostly just cable modem or unserved technologies and just little handfuls of fiber. You got a decently sized area here. 42 locations per mile, so it's right there on the threshold of being potential investment grade. 5,000 locations, that's a good number. That'll make it interesting to more providers. And then you see, look at the ones around it, they're somewhat smaller. You might be able to, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in on this a bit and turn on the fabric points. Make sure we don't have fiber claims in between. No, we don't have any fiber claims in between. So it's possible that you could turn this into a bigger service area if you get clever and look at ways to get through. Interstates usually are not good things for fiber routes. They tend to be more of a barrier than they are a facilitator. But if you can find, if we were able to, a provider might be able to look at this area and decide that they could string together some of these smaller ones to turn it into a single larger area. Also, when you look at the award patterns, you can see that you do have awards bordering these. Like this little fiber here has some state awards. These dots are state locations that were funded, and it's got a bunch of them surrounding it. So that's one that has potential to be built. Let's see if this has data for who won this.
And just while Sean's looking at that, just to point out that in the password protected maps, this is everything he's looking at is available to you.
Yep. Skyrunner, that's who got this one. So this might be Skyrunner might look at this area and say, oh yeah, that's enough density, even though we're not grant funded for all those locations, we'll pick them up because we have to serve some of those locations anyway. Same thing when you get over here. This Fiberhood area has, again, not quite the greatest density, 34. So that's a little below what somebody typically would go in there independently, but it does have awards on both sides of it. And if we put on the pre-challenge BEAD locations, not a whole lot help there from BEAD. There is some. But this is the kind of one that I would expect if somebody was going to build this, they would do it as an add-on to either an existing grant, or they would use it to make their economic case better internally to apply for BEAD funding. If we swing over,
I just suggest we should switch to the deliverables pretty soon and then let people ask questions.
Okay, I'll do one quick one over here in Graham County. This Fiberhood here, again, it's borderline as far as density, decent size. But what I like to do on this one is that it tests terrible. Like the cable provider here is not doing a good job of maintaining their infrastructure, or they're just not bothering to actually run it at full capability. And there is one little claim, I believe this is Balsam West, has one little fiber hex here in this space. But this would be a good place where you know that the existing cable provider is not performing well, so somebody could come in and compete with them and probably pull 70 to 80% take rate. Okay, I will go ahead and step off of this and hand off to Andrea now because I don't want to hog all of the time.
I'm happy to go back to the maps based on
Yeah.
questions, but yeah, thought it'd be good for Andrea to show us the deliverables.
I have to go off mute, Andrea.
Thanks, Sarah. So can everyone see this beautiful picture of Lake Otsego?
Yep.
Okay, so everyone should have received a link to a folder that has a packet that looks similar to this. So these are accompaniments to your password protected maps. So you have something tangible to use with the maps that Sean's been showing you. We made one for everyone. I chose New York for a reason, and I have a couple other examples that I pulled up based on what Sean was talking about. So in the beginning, it has all that basic information in case you're using this with team members who are not part of this conversation. If this comes up in planning meetings later on, or you have new people adding to your staff, or you're using these for grant accompaniments, or part of community development meetings. So it explains kind of the basic of what Fiberhoods are, gives an introduction to the things we're talking about so that you have the talking points and don't need to recall and remember how to speak about this. It gives an overview of the state as it looks today. So these are the FCC provider claimed speeds based on version 3.2 of the fabric. So that's what we used in this project. So these are those claimed speeds where you see those big areas of green. And then this has all of that data. So this has the counties that participated in the project. This is the number of locations that are going to be in each area that I'll show you later. The approximate number of road miles, because we use that as a basis for fiber deployment, the number of locations, and how close it is to middle mile, if middle mile exists. And then there's a little description of an overview of the county. And then we go into each county. So these, we stripped all the extra noise and all the extra layers away so that you can see the actual Fiberhood with the hexes here and the individual data pieces. So this kind of is the information that Sean was giving you. So, it'll have some base information. So, Shenango County, Norwich, we randomly name these Fiberhoods based on, proximity to a township, a community, some point of interest, if there's an airport, a lake, or something else there. So, Norwich here is served only by cable modem. So there's a handful of high population density hexes that are claimed by Frontier. So this could indicate that Frontier currently is in the midst of a competitive overbuild in the community. Given the density and proximity to claimed fiber infrastructure, the rest of the area would be an appealing target for Frontier. And this includes some BEAD eligible locations. So this is something that you could talk about with some planners, or it would be an opportunity to talk with that cable provider if you're looking for a partner for BEAD eligibility, if you're looking to go after, go ahead.
Yeah, before you jump off that, the distance to middle mile can look depressing because 19 miles to build to middle mile would be really daunting from a financial perspective. That's open middle mile. So if you're just starting your own ISP, what you're looking for is open middle mile, usually funded by somebody like NTIA, where they have to sell on a non-discriminatory basis to any taker. So that's what we mapped is open middle mile. Frontier, who's in the area, obviously has fiber in the area, but it's proprietary fiber. So our distance to middle mile is distance to open middle mile, but there's, the Comcasts and Charters and Frontiers, they've all built fiber. They just don't show us where it is. They won't tell you, and they only use it for their own purposes.
And that's something else important. We did not put any proprietary data in here, so that in the event you attach this to something or use it in a meeting, you're not going to expose yourself. So oh, go ahead, Sean.
I'll throw in one more comment on middle mile. Some states, and New York was one of them, when we did the initial middle mile mapping, it was best effort to get as much data as we could on open middle mile. In some states, it was easier than others. And New York was one of the ones that was challenging to get all of the middle mile routes. So it's very possible that there is other middle mile that's closer than that distance, and we just were unable to get layers for it.
And if you compare this to your login on your map, you'll be able to see the open middle mile that's there. So that's where this distance was. I'm pointing to my screen. I talk with my hands. You can't see me pointing. This distance will match your map that you can see. So if it's not on the map and you find other middle mile, then that's a positive because that distance would shrink. So this is New York. So every county that's in your county map, every fiberhood that's in your map is on one of these pages, and they're all individually described. They're all individually illustrated in here so that you have something on paper and then something that you can look at and then click down into those details and add those layers. A couple things I wanted to point out. So where Sean was talking about some areas, I wanted to point out Mahoning County specifically, where he was talking about some of the larger fiberhoods that crossed county boundaries, because obviously a fiber provider, there's not a great wall between Mahoning and Trumbull County where they can't go over that. Their service areas do go over those areas. So if there was a fiber hood that crossed a county boundary, your pages might have a pullout like this. So you would know, if the description said that you might want to zoom out a little bit on your map so that you could see that larger area. So I think there's Pennsylvania also is another one that had a couple of those. And another thing that Sean mentioned was these areas where fiber providers, let me see if I can, oops, sorry, let me zoom in, might be along a road where there's multiple areas close to each other that they could
string together.
Oops. Sorry, I jumped ahead too many pages. That they could string these together. You might see it like this with a dotted line. And they're described, I'm pointing to my screen again, I apologize. And they're described as such and illustrated that way.
Well, it's a really good point too, that you can share these deliverables with anybody. As Andrea said, we've stripped out the proprietary information. Dun & Bradstreet data is not in there. The Fabric data is not in there, which we couldn't share publicly, but you can share these with anybody.
And I think that comes with a good reminder that some of the information that is in your map isn't necessarily appropriate to be shared with everybody.
Right. Yeah, the Dun & Bradstreet data is licensed. The Fabric data is licensed.
Feel free to take the information, and repackage it and talk about it. But one of the reasons why we thought that this deliverable was important was to give you something that you could share without any concerns of propriety.
Well, we've got 20 minutes. Should we open it up to questions at this point?
I think that's a great idea. And just if folks wanted to, could we bring up their specific county up? Could Sean bring it up, for instance, on a map?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. That's not a problem.
Okay. Great opportunity, folks, if you have any questions.
And Andrea, I didn't know if there were any other specific examples you wanted to do. I just want to make sure we had time for questions.
Those were
Jennifer
just
in
a
the
few.
chat is saying we've got a county missing. Jennifer, can you put in there what county that is? And I'll look on the map. Union, PA. All right. actually in PA, so that's helpful. Or, I'm in the PA map at the moment. Okay, I think I'm going to do a little manipulating of I'll talk through what I'm doing here so you'll wonder, or if you want to talk about something else, I'm thinking what's happening is that Union did not have any Fiberhoods that were on their own. There are a couple that extend across the river and across the county boundary, but most of those Fiberhoods, yeah, I'll go ahead and put this up real quick so you can see what's going on.
In the meantime, Cheryl, I'll send you your ArcGIS password privately in the chat.
So here we got Union County, and in most, let's see why. Let's turn on the FCC data. Lots of DSL, usually the DSL that's still being claimed that way means there's low population density, some fiber, and a bunch of cable. So let's see what yeah, so you've just got a handful of fairly low density hexes.
So can I still get that in the report? Because I've got a set of county commissioners who will throw a royal fit if their county is not included. They'll be
That
like,
makes
why were
sense.
we left out?
I
And
will
I'll just-
add
Yeah,
that for you.
Yeah, and there are, like over here on the eastern boundary, these Fiberhoods both cross over. Well, this one doesn't, but is there a river crossing? There is a river crossing there.
Well, don't try to invent it. Just let's.
No, I won't invent it. I'm just like letting you know, like in this
Yeah.
case, there are a couple that extend into the county. So probably that one would be, we could call that out as being shared with across the river.
Cheryl.
The other thing you can do is you could look at the hex, because like when Andrea does this, these blue hexes will be visible, and those are ones that I couldn't find a good way to turn them into viable areas on their own, but that at least shows where the density is.
Yeah, it would just be helpful to have them included in their own pull out like the rest of them.
Right, so they don't feel like they got forgotten or
Yeah,
And I'll put a 0 line on the table for you also.
Great. Awesome.
I will do
Thank
that.
you.
So there's another question that I'm seeing that maybe not everyone's seeing is, the question is, who are we approaching with this? Is it a rural cooperative? Is it a large ISP? Is it a small ISP? And the answer is yes, right? The answer is yes, all of that. This is also economic development. This is also, are you considering doing a municipal build? Is that something that might be possible in your area? We know what rural America looks like, so we know that the idea of a municipal build maybe is the least feasible of those options. But this is the kind of thing that you should shop to every and all potential investors.
One of the best ways to get an ISP to deploy is to announce a municipal build. They go crazy over municipal builds. And large ISPs, small ISPs, rural electric cooperatives, they're all great options. Here in Ohio, where we live, we've got a couple of really small ISPs that are doing just tremendous work. And of course, we've got the big players, Charter and Frontier and Windstreams as well. Yeah, our goal is to get fiber as many places as possible. And right now, this focuses on areas that could be deployed without grant funding.
Yeah, we're always big fans of working with rural electric co-ops if they have the appetite for it, because as we all know, the mission of a rural electric co-op is so different and so unique and so community focused that when they can do it, it becomes a really great opportunity for all of the community.
When Tiffany brings up a good point that some states have formally restricted having municipally owned or government owned networks. And Cheryl has a question about getting the GIS files. Cheryl, are you thinking about the hexes, the colored hexes and the Fiberhood outlines? The answer is yeah, we can share some layers with you. We can't share the proprietary layers, but we can share these layers that we've derived at the hex level and those fiber hoods.
I think, didn't we also make like a downloaded PDF form? Andrea did that like a few months ago. I can also look for that and send that to Cheryl.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But if she actually wants to get in and manipulate the layers, that's going to be different.
Yeah, I'll make a note to export everything that we can export legally for her and send it to her.
Okay. All right. Now it looks like Tiffany is saying Jackson County'd like to get the shapefile as possible. Yeah, Cheryl wants to put it in their own ArcGIS. Makes sense.
Is that Jackson, North Carolina?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we'd
I'm
like to
getting-
clarify, because one thing we found out is just that every state in Appalachia has a Jackson County.
Sarah, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. Obviously familiar with Reid Consulting and this work, but just looking through the Fiberhoods workbook, I just think it's extremely helpful to have a better sense of where potentially these providers might be going. Kind of had a really good idea that we did have an extensive, hybrid coaxial cable network there in Mahoning County, and I think that's why you see, providers like a Lumos, like an Omni Fiber coming into our region, because there's just not a lot of fiber laid throughout that county. So it was confusing because we don't consider typically Mahoning County unserved in the sense that their download speeds are still pretty high, but just to see where the fiber builds are going is just very interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And as I mentioned, they are going to smaller and smaller markets. That's why we think these fiber hoods could help the ISPs kind of find their way into these areas that they may not have spotted otherwise.
Yeah, and most of these, or I shouldn't say many of these fiber hoods, they definitely are not unserved. Like they are served, but they're good potential to be served better, and people could make money doing it.
Right.
Like the Graham County, North Carolina was a good example of one where, like, even though they're claimed served, like they don't look very good. So that's even more so. Mahoning, if you have like if the incumbents have done better job of maintaining their cable plant, the speed results might be better, but it still economically makes sense to a provider to come in and compete.
Well, and what the fiber providers have told us is they're willing to go toe to toe with any cable operator. So if there's not a fiber provider in a territory, they're willing to go into that territory and go toe to toe. They expect at least 30% take rate. Most of them build their financial formulas on a 30% take rate. If they can get higher than that, which they often do, then they're in really good shape financially. We had this in a little town, Athens, where I live, Athens, Ohio. It was all Charter cable modems under the Spectrum brand, and Frontier, that had been the beleaguered DSL provider that nobody paid any attention to, they came in and overbuilt with fiber. So now we've got two behemoths fighting each other for the service in Athens, and that's to us one of the big advantages of these fiber overbuilds is it gets the cable provider to do a better job. So now you've got this competitive environment.
I guess I do have one quick follow-up then. Do you think it's a good idea to share this with Spectrum with the bright speed?
Sarah asked me to bring up Jackson County, North Carolina.
Mark,
Go ahead,
I hear
Tom.
you there.
I'm sorry, did you want me to repeat that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's better.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. No, so is this something that I shouldn't assume that the providers already know this? I don't know if I'm maybe giving them too much credit, given maybe the attention to detail they have on this type of stuff, but it's eye-opening for me. But should I assume that a Charter Spectrum or a Brightspeed or, some of our providers already know that those are opportunities where they should put fiber, or, share this with them, talk to them about it?
I'd share it, particularly when we get into these, what we call the string of pearls. the smaller clusters of population that you can pull together into a decent service size, because they are going down market. So they're going to notice the big places that are available. They're going to notice things adjacent to their territory. But two things you can get out of it. One is they might not have seen some of these areas. The other is they might tell you their plans. You know, it might be on a confidential basis, but I go, yeah, we're getting ready to build that, which, you know, just helpful in terms of your own working out how to solve the broadband puzzle.
And if I'm remembering correctly, a lot of your territory, there's a lot of Charter cable, and they tend, and they're not alone in this, but they tend not to want to overbuild themselves. So like they'll know that they probably know that they're at risk of being competed with, but like they're not going to care about Fiberhoods that are already in their territory because they won't overbuild unless they either get a funding to do it or somebody else comes in and forces them to, because they don't want to lose their subscribers. But what you do there in that case, if it's Charter territory, that's where you talk to the Lumoses and the Ohio Gigs and, you know, even AT&T, and you say, do you want to go head to head with Charter? And here's some good places. It's always a fine line, especially if you have a relationship with ISPs, like of, you know, you want to encourage the relationship, but you also got to kind of remind them that, hey, we're not just helping you. We want to make sure we get the best service. Okay, Sarah had asked me to pull up Jackson County, North Carolina, so that's what's up on the share here at the moment. Is there specific things you all want me to drill in on?
Looks like
Tiffany
you got
asked
some
for
string of
that.
pearls.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a walkthrough.
Yeah, just an overall walkthrough because this is
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so you've got, looks like, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Fiberhood areas. Let's look at why they're scattered the way they are. So look at the FCC data. You've got decent amount of fiber claims in parts of the county. And then cable modem, as this is why these are showing where they are. That's where the cable modem stuff is. Let's take a look at the locations. So yeah, the fiber is following a lot of the fiber claims are following a lot of the population density, except here just east of Dillsboro, Cullowhee area. I actually know that area, so I know there is pretty good population density, and there are also a lot of rivers cutting through there, which can make it challenging. So let's go ahead and pull in closer and select this area here in Silva. Fairly low density at 28 per mile, but a good number of locations. You got over 2,000. Let's see what the awards situation is. Okay, you're in a good situation here with awards because you've got multiple different adjoining ones. So Time Warner, which is Charter, Spectrum. So they've got a federal award through RDOF to be serving this census block. I'm guessing that's what this tiny little block here is too. Yep. So Charter's a player in there. Let's see if they are the incumbent cable provider. No, so they'd be competing with Optimum. So there's potential. Charter might look at this and say, oh yeah, that's good density and we can compete with Optimum. We'll expand off of our RDOF. Let's see who all of these state dots are.
Although the cable providers kind of frequently do not compete with each other.
Yeah, the big ones often have kind of like unwritten gentleman agreement of like, oh, this is your territory, this is my territory. Okay, so Optimum got the state awards out here in this section. So maybe Optimum would also build into this area, or they might just sit on it because it's already got density and then that, you know, they don't necessarily see. Yeah.
What state award did Optimum get? I'm not aware of one.
Let me see. Make sure I looked at the right thing. Oh, I did not look at the right thing.
Okay.
Let's see what the actual provider is.
I mean, they're a provider, but they did not get a state award.
Yep, Spectrum. Okay, so Charter, this is surrounded by Charter grant awards.
Okay.
So
Thank
it's possible Charter might look at this and say, yeah, we'll just pick it all up because,
Yeah, they might.
you know, we're having to build infrastructure all around there anyway. Let's see who these isolated fiber claims are. Yeah, thanks for noticing that. Okay, so Optimum's claiming fiber in that single hex. Charter's got that fiber claim. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting patchwork of competitors in this space.
Yeah, sure is.
And these are all good examples. Like these two are a good example where I think that's a tuck that's passing through there. There's no river crossing. There's no bridge that I was able to find. So this one would be, even though these are right next to each other, you'd have trouble combining them unless it's part of a larger network footprint where, like if it's, again, Charter surrounding them on both sides, even this is probably a little Charter sliver here as well. Yep.
And Charter does pursue what they call synergy builds around their RDOF territory, where they pick up little pockets of population density that are adjacent to their RDOF. So they may be planning it. And those are BEAD eligible, the red dots?
Those are pre-challenge BEAD eligible. Yeah. So if those hold up, that's going to make these areas pretty attractive because that's good population density for a grant build.
Yeah.
And considering how much footprint Charter has committed to already, I would not surprise me if they apply for funding to get these, to pick up these locations as well. Let me turn off the award here for a second. Yeah, so like this is a good example right here where it's because there's BEAD eligibility, maybe they won't build until the grant money comes available, but these blue dots, these little blue dots here, this is a good example. I'll toggle the award back on off. So you can see that the RDOF award, they were all based on census blocks, and a lot of times the boundary for a census block is the road, and that's the case here. You can see it following the road. And so these 6 or 8 locations have a federal funding commitment. Charter is supposed to serve them. The ones on this side of the road do not have a grant fund, but Charter's going to have to run fiber down this road anyway to serve these. And this is a classic example of that synergy build where they're going to pick up, I would expect them to pick up these locations on the other side anyway, because they're already passing them. It's actually doesn't make economic sense not to pick them up.
Well, we're about out of time. Any other final questions?
What are those little red dots, Sean?
These, like the ones that are turning on and off right now?
Yes.
Yeah, those are BEAD eligible. The red are unserved and the yellow are underserved. And this is pre-challenge. North Carolina's challenge process is still going on. It got delayed by the hurricane. So it could change. Some of these might expand or disappear once their final addresses get released.
Thanks. We are at the hour, so just wondering if anyone from Reid has some closing notes, thoughts.
Yeah, just happy everybody attended. Hope you find this information useful. Again, we're just trying to figure out all the different approaches to solving the digital divide. And as frustrating as it can be that some of the remote rural areas are still waiting, I think, the Fiberhoods are a way to try to solve some of the problems in the areas without having to get grant funding for them. So, every way we can try to peel this carrot, we'll keep going after it.
Also want to add that obviously if you have questions, feel free to go through Sarah and the team at Connect Humanity, but we're also pretty easy to get a hold of. Our email addresses are just our first name at Reid Consulting Group. So I'm Kim at Reid Consulting Group, Tom's Tom at Reid Consulting Group, and so on. We're always happy to forward and answer where we can.
Thanks to the Reid team that put a tremendous amount of effort in thinking through how to deliver this information to you all. So thank you to your team. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. I can help also direct people to the PDF files, shape files, anything you're looking for, passwords. Thanks for joining us today.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.